All right. So welcome back. This is week 3 of the Forest Adaptation Planning and Practices course, Adaptation Planning and Practices course. So thanks for joining us. We are going to have a good day today in terms of setting up session 3, where we talk about step 3, challenges and opportunities. That'll be our topic today. I know that our lectures have been going a little longer than we anticipated the last 2 weeks. I had a lot of material to fill in. I know especially for you folks who have the Tuesday discussion, it makes for a really long morning. This morning should go a bit quicker. So we'll have a little bit less lecture and some time for you to catch up. We have a couple folks on the line from our NIAX team today, but 2 of us will be kind of taking the lead on this lecture. I'm Maria Genoviak, and I'm the Deputy Director for NIAX.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Marcinkowski, and I am a Climate Change Education Specialist with NIAX. I've been helping with the Wednesday group, so maybe half of you guys know me. And I am getting over a cold. So the good news is you can't catch it through the computer, but the bad news is that I feel like I sound like I have a cold, so I'm sorry that you have to listen to me.
Thanks, Kaylee. No, you don't sound bad. It's all in your head and how you sound.
Okay.
So
Okay, good.
that's good. But I do appreciate that about video meetings, seeing the number of colds that have been going around lately. So we won't get you guys sick. So what we'll do today is we'll do a very, very brief recap of step 2. More of that we expect to be in the discussion sessions. We will introduce step 3, the next step of the workbook, which focuses on challenges and opportunities, and then we'll give you the assignment and homework for next week. So step 2 that you talked about last week was where we really thought about how climate change affects your project areas. Like I said, I know there's been a lot of material in terms of what we've covered so far, and step 2 is probably the biggest step in terms of information to take in. So honestly, I know some of you are still working on it. That's fine. It would be wonderful if you just quickly chatted in how you're feeling about step 2 as you've gone through it. We will have additional time after this lecture during the discussions to troubleshoot any issues you might be having. We won't focus on that in the lecture piece, but it'd be great to hear how you're feeling, if there was something that was interesting that you learned as part of doing step 2, or if there's a part where you're still kind of puzzling through. So please chat those in. People are reluctant to. All right. All right. I think so then again, as I said, today we'll be moving on to step 3, where we're going to talk about challenges and opportunities from your climate impacts. So the way that I think about this, and again, still waiting for you guys to chat and stuff about step 2, is that in step 1, we set up our goals and objectives, where we're defining what our project is. In step 2, we're thinking about, here's what climate change is expected to do nationally, regionally, big picture. And what we're doing is we're taking our expertise of a local area, our knowledge of a local area, and thinking about how climate change is going to affect that particular place and the characteristics of that place that maybe make it more or less vulnerable than other ecosystems that are similar to it in a particular area. And then in step 3, we're combining those two to think about how our project that we've defined at our goals and objectives and our climate change impacts and vulnerabilities combine, and how climate change affects our ability to meet our management goals and objectives. And so this is one part where we see, I think the adaptation workbook online helps with this. We see this in workshops though, where people will get a little bit confused or feel like steps 2 and 3 are a little bit redundant. And so, really, again, just to reiterate the difference between them, step 2 is you're describing how climate change may affect your site and describing site characteristics that, increase or decrease climate-related vulnerabilities. So again, what is it about your place that's unique and how is climate change going to affect it? And then step 3, which is what we'll be talking about today, is really thinking about how those climate impacts that you describe in step 2 are going to affect your ability to meet your management goals and objectives. So again, there's there's a little bit of a difference, and these are going to build on each other. So if I know that people, and I'm seeing comments that people, do feel overwhelmed sometimes by the amount of information in step 2. It is the biggest step, but the nice thing is that it will flow right into step 3 and make step 3 a lot easier as you get down to that piece. And we have a break next week to allow you to fully catch up. So we definitely hear you, because we know this is a more involved step. And so we don't necessarily expect that you have to have step 2 finished, but by, we'll talk about this, but, by the next time we meet, you'll be able to get through step 2 and 3. So good, thank you for your comments. I'm gonna keep reading those while I'm gonna turn it over to Kaylee to set us up for step 3.
Sure. I think maybe as we talk about step 3, it might help define the difference between 2 and 3, and you might realize that you were doing way too much stuff in step 2 that could have been divided into step 3. So we'll see as we talk about it. Okay, so step 3 is where we're going to connect climate change to our current management, and we're going to ask ourselves a few key questions about how climate change will make our objectives more or less difficult to achieve. So these really relate to management challenges or opportunities that climate change presents. Can our current management goals, considering climate change, can we meet those management goals, or do I need to change my goals and objectives, maybe rethink them after considering climate change? So we want to take in all that information and assess our management objectives feasibility. So if our objectives don't seem feasible given climate change that we learned about in step 2 and thought about in step 3, can we alter or modify them so that we can move forward? Okay, I'm gonna try to advance without clicking the button too many times and advancing so far. Okay, I think that was just once. Yes. All right, so the first thing we're going to do in step 3 is to identify challenges to meeting our management objectives. So we're going to list ways that climate change impacts and associated vulnerabilities might make it more difficult to achieve those management objectives. So the emphasis here is that these are specifically climate change challenges. How will climate change make it harder to achieve those management objectives? Of course, there are other factors that can affect your ability to meet management objectives, but for right now, we want to focus on climate change challenges. So try not to think too far outside your management box and get caught up in policies or global markets. We want to stay focused on our project and things that are within your management control. Okay, these are some examples from past projects. They have objectives listed and then challenges to those objectives from climate change. So these challenges are related to the impacts that we identified in step 2, but now we're focusing on how those management objectives will be impacted by the climate change impacts. So if we look at the first one of our objectives was to provide protection and habitat for turtles. And we discovered in step 2 that it might be, we might be getting more drier conditions in our region with climate change. So if we bring that back around to our objective, those drier conditions might make it more challenging to maintain that turtle habitat. Oops. All right, press the button too many times. So once we've thought about and listed challenges for an objective, then we want to go on and list opportunities that climate change would create for achieving your management objective. So same as before, these are specifically about climate change opportunities. How is climate change going to make it easier for you to get those objectives done? And it might seem like it's more difficult to think about opportunities than challenges, but you guys are the site experts and the management experts, and you will be able to find that silver lining. And same thing, Maria just wrote up on the screen. We want to focus on opportunities that we can control, that are within our management, and not getting too far out in the weeds. I feel like sometimes I press the button once and it moves really far ahead, and then sometimes I press it a million times and it doesn't move at all. So there's no rhyme or reason. Okay, this is the same table we saw before, but we added in a new column about opportunities. So let's maybe look at the second example, where for our objective, we want to improve breeding habitat for birds through forest structure. And one of the challenges we identified is that conifer species are projected to decline and reduce habitat, but our opportunity given that is that maybe birds prefer forest structure over species mix. So changing composition with less conifers might not matter as much as having a diverse structure. So our opportunity focuses on spending our effort on that diverse structure rather than species mix and worrying about conifers not doing as well. So sometimes when we think about opportunities, they might point us towards potential adaptation actions. But this is the next step. We're only on step 3. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. So if you do get like a light bulb going off in your head about adaptation actions, go ahead and like write them down somewhere, put them on a sticky note, put a pin in it. So you'll have it ready for step 4, but try again not to get too far ahead of yourself. Whoops. Okay. After we've identified challenges and opportunities for each objective, then we want to evaluate the feasibility of achieving those objectives given climate change. So we want to weigh the challenges and opportunities against each other. And when we compare them and weigh them against each other, that will help us determine the feasibility of moving forward with those management objectives. Okay. So feasibility is the ability to meet your management objectives given current business as usual management actions. So how likely is it that you can continue with an objective given what you've learned about climate impacts in step 2, and then those challenges and opportunities you identified in step 3? So maybe you've thought of a few really good opportunities that they weigh the scale down towards opportunities, and you think you'll have an easier time achieving your objectives. Then you are well on your way to high feasibility. Or maybe it's opposite and you have more challenges than opportunities, and it kind of tips the scale towards having a harder time achieving your objectives. So then your feasibility is low. And you can also, maybe you have a pretty balanced situation and you have moderate feasibility, or you have identified some challenges, but you think that those challenges, you can overcome them with additional resources or adjustments, so you rate your feasibility as more moderate. We can also think about feasibility with our timing. Maybe you have high feasibility in the short term over the next 10 years or so, but then your feasibility becomes moderate or low as your challenges begin to weigh more. So it's important to think more about short term and also about long term. What's the feasibility of your objective like 50 years from now? Okay, when we are thinking about feasibility, that's when we can also identify other considerations beyond climate change. So there's a little section where you can list any social or financial or other factors that might be part of your decision to pursue your management objectives. So this is also the spot where you can justify keeping your objective as it is, even though feasibility might be low. It could be that you are protecting something that's required by law, so even though feasibility of it is low, you still are legally obligated to continue with that management objective. Or maybe you thought feasibility was high, but it's going to be hard to pull off for various reasons like funding or a lack of public support or something, and you can list those as other considerations in this step, part of step 3. Okay, so same table, more columns. We added feasibility and other considerations here. So if we look at the bottom example, our objective was we wanted to maintain existing and also develop new walking trails. So for our challenges, we had learned we have extreme precipitation is really likely, and it might increase erosion or flooding along our pathways. But one of our opportunities was that we could design these new trails to reduce the impacts from extreme weather. So we thought about it and we weighed them against each other and decided that the feasibility of this objective was low. And that's because we had some other considerations, maybe the ever important funding. We didn't have enough funding to make these trail improvements. So you can see here that other considerations is those things outside of climate change and things you want to note when you're evaluating your management goals and objectives. Whoops, I think I went too far. Yes, there we go. Okay, I went too far, but let's slow down. So before you finish step 3, we want you to take a step back and consider whether you want to actually even continue with your management objectives as you had originally written them, or if you think it would be a good idea to adjust them. So slowing down gives you that chance to really finalize those objectives before you move on to step 4 and think about actions. Climate change can make some of those objectives more difficult to achieve, and you might want to alter or refine them, your goals and your objectives, to better account for those anticipated climate change impacts. This is especially important if you're finding that you have a management objective with low feasibility. This would be a good time to consider whether you want to continue with that objective or maybe you want to change it. Are there ways to rethink your objectives to make them more feasible and sensible given climate change? So take a step back and slow down. The little turtle will warn you. All right, same table again. So even if you have a management objective that has low feasibility, you can still continue with it. You just might need to recognize that, you might have an increased risk of failure, or you might need additional resources in order to pull that off. So we went through that bottom example where we had low feasibility, and maybe we have members of the public or clients that really just expect us to continue to provide trails, so we decide to keep this objective despite the low feasibility, recognizing that we're going to have to take additional steps to make sure that we're successful in meeting that objective, and maybe apply for additional funding and that sort of thing. And then we would outline those adaptation actions in step 4, which we're not there yet. Or maybe none of that's true and you don't have any public or clients or anything that's expecting you to do trails and you have no available funding. So what you would want to do is just accept your low feasibility for achieving that management objective, and deciding that your objectives probably need to change. So now that we've slowed down and thought about it, we can go back to step 1 and modify our objectives. So if we do that, it's no big deal. We just go back, we modify them in step 1, and then the workbook automatically updates your objectives in step 3. So if you go back and revise your objectives in step 1, you can head right back to step 3 and evaluate your new objectives. And then you can always go back and work in step 2 if you think that's necessary too. Oops, sorry, too many again. Okay. So these are just a few key points summarized for step 3. First off, the big thing, just getting down on it, challenges and opportunities that you're identifying on this step should relate to climate change. The course is about climate change and how these impacts affect our management. And if you do have other management challenges or opportunities that you want to record that are not related to climate change, those go under the other considerations item when you're thinking about feasibility. So everyone deals with policy and budget constraints and engaging the public and other not climate related things, but when we're thinking about challenges and opportunities, we really want to filter those out into the other considerations section and just focus solely on climate change. And then like Maria said, there is a difference between step 2 and step 3. So even though it might seem redundant, step 2 focuses on vulnerabilities and climate impacts of your site, so focusing on the site. And then step 3 brings in the management component and helps you think about climate change impacts on your objectives and then the feasibility of those objectives. So step 3 is site, step 2 is site, and step 3 is objectives. So for step 3, you don't need to restate all of the climate change impacts over again. You did that in step 2. You just really want to hone in on the biggest management challenges and opportunities that you see and focus on those and the overall feasibility of moving forward with what you have. And then it might be tempting to like move a little bit forward and start listing adaptation strategies here in step 3, but don't. Just write them down, put them somewhere where you'll see them in a couple of weeks, but don't start working on incorporating them yet. Maria, do you have any other points you want to make about step 3 being a bridge between like steps 2 and 4?
Not in particular. I think I see one of the comments from the folks working at Save Mommy, and I think it's a good one that kind of reiterates how all of this can work. And so the comment is, you know, that they think it's important to focus on trees that have low adaptive capacity and high vulnerability because they want to give those trees, they're vulnerable, but give them like the best chance of success moving forward. And I think that's a really good illustration where you have low feasibility potentially because you might kind of be rooting for a species that's threatened or sensitive. And then, you know, you consider in step 3, do you want to continue with that objective? And if you say yes, then you just have to know that going into step 4, you're going to have, we're going to be identifying actions to increase your chances of success. And so I think it's really, generally, I would say most people don't change their objectives. We don't necessarily expect people to, even though we're spending a lot of time on it, but we want people to take that time to think about it because I think, you know, as climate change creates additional challenges over time, it's going to become a bigger and bigger question. So we want you to be thinking about it now, even if you continue as planned.
Definitely. I feel like it's almost like being self-aware about your objectives and you know the feasibility is going to be low, and so you're taking the steps forward to address that.
Yeah, and I think, which is building on that's a good point, Kaylee. I think, you know, a lot of people here are working on public lands of some sort, like cities or municipalities or, you know, different ones where you have a lot of stakeholders. And so just thinking through that and having that self-awareness will be really helpful for communicating with your stakeholders down the line too.
Are there any questions before we go through the workbook?
All right, well, let's keep rolling. So the good thing, like I said, I think you guys are largely over the hump. Step 2 is a lot more involved. You're assimilating a lot of information. People commented on that. Fortunately, in the workbook, step 3 is much more straightforward as well. And so I think it should be an easier step. I'll walk through it. And then the other point is, you know, just like Kaylee said, you've already probably cataloged a lot of climate change impacts information in step 2. You don't need to restate that. You know, you can just really focus on where do you need to like document or put these ideas on paper as part of this step 3. So in terms of what the workbook looks like, by now also you're reaching the hump and that you're getting more familiar with the tool. So as you know, with all the steps, you enter into the step, you're going to have the course materials drop down. We will get the slides and this lecture posted later today that will be available. So you'll have those course materials and the homework. There are the instructions for step 3 and the video that you can use to supplement this recording from the lecture. And then the nice thing is also that some of those steps, like step 1 and step 2, were broken into 2 parts in the workbook. Step 3 is just one single piece. So again, it's a lot more simple. When you come into the workbook, you will see on the left your management units, your forest types, land uses, or management topics that you created. Then on the right-hand side is your workspace. If you want to see your climate impacts from step 2, there's a expand contract, so you can have those there easily viewable if you want them, so you don't have to go back to step 2. So your regional climate impacts and climate impacts by unit will be there if you want to expand them. If not, when you're ready to dive in, they will be collapsed, and what it'll look like is just for that particular management unit or land use that you're in. So here we're looking at invasive species. It will list your goals and your objectives that you identified for that forest type or land use or management topic. And then there'll be an area where you just put in all of the information related to this step that we just went through. So you'll list the ways that climate impacts make it more difficult to achieve your management goals and objectives. So there's a box for challenges. You can click add a challenge to add additional challenges, as many as you'd like. It's up to you as to whether you want to put them all in one paragraph or, kind of line out each one. Same thing with the opportunities box. You can list different ways climate impacts will make it easier to achieve your management goals and objectives. You can add one opportunity, or you can write a paragraph, or you can click and add another and just put in a bunch of different bullets related to opportunities. Then you'll select your feasibility from a drop-down menu. So this is what Kaylee said, you're basically weighing your challenges and opportunities. So if your challenges are greater than your opportunities, you'll probably have lower feasibility. If your opportunities are greater, you'll have higher feasibility. So you can choose that. Again, we have those little hover eyes, those little info eyes. If you hover or click on that, it will give you the instructions if you need to reference that. So you'll choose low, medium, or high from the drop-down menu. And then there's a box if you want to add any comments. And again, not necessary, but this could be useful if you're seeing something like Kaylee said, where you have maybe high feasibility in the short term, but you think in the long term you might have low feasibility. You can describe that. So we only have one drop down. You can pick which one you want to emphasize, but then you can provide additional detail if you have anything to say about your feasibility. And then there's that other considerations box. And again, this is for the pieces that your challenges and your opportunities are related to climate change, but the other considerations is this grab bag of all the other pieces that relate to your management, like funding or resources or staff time or public issues or timing, a lot of these things that you're just dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so, particularly if it's not climate change that's affecting your ability to meet your management objective, but something else, this is a good place to capture that. So this menu will just be this kind of field that you're seeing with challenges, opportunities, feasibility, and other considerations will be repeated for all the goals and objectives you have in a particular forest type or land use or management area. So you'll keep scrolling down, and then you'll click through the different units on the left-hand side as well. So here on the left, you would continue to click through all the different types that you have. And then you would click on, when you're done, you would click on Next to go to Homework 3. We'll have our friend the turtle pop up and remind you to just think about that question of, do any of your goals and objectives need to change? So again, if you have high feasibility, you can just keep on moving along. If you have low feasibility, you just need to think about, yes, I want to proceed with low feasibility, and I know that that's going to mean that I might have a greater risk of failure, or that I'm going to have to take adaptation actions in step 4 to address those challenges. That's fine. Or if you had a reason to, you could go back and change it. Here's an example of just what it would look like if you decided you wanted to go back and change something. So let's say in this example, we had an objective, which was to increase the % cover of native species in an urban area. And what we discovered during step 3 is that a lot of the native species, in 2 and 3 actually, that there's a lot of native species that are projected to decline that we think would affect the project area. We would have found that in step 2. And then in step 3, we would have rated our goal and our objective as low feasibility because we wouldn't be able to increase native species cover given that so many species are projected to decline. And so we might go back to step 1 and decide to change it. So we would go open up the left-hand panel, click on management goals and objectives in step 1, and maybe we would edit the objective to go from focusing on the percent cover of native species to the percent cover of species that are native or expected to gain habitat. So we might be allowing for non-native species from farther south that are expected to be compatible with the site. And then that objective would have higher feasibility. So we would jump back to step 1, we would edit our objective, then we would come back to step 3, and then we could change any of the feasibility information that might be applicable to that new objective. Again, this isn't really too common that we see that, but that is an option that's available as you're going through this and you're maybe continuing to think about your goals and objectives and refine them over time. And then, as with all the steps, there is the homework at the end. So just that quick homework screen. That's what it looks like in the adaptation workbook. I will pause and let people chat in any questions. If you do, let us know and we can hang on and go through that again. Otherwise, we're pretty good on time here. Your assignment for next time is to go through, continue to finish up any items from step 2. Hopefully this discussion has been helpful. Hopefully, you're gathering through that information and getting a sense of that. If you haven't completed that step, sounds like a lot of people are have been wrapping their arms around it and are ready to continue moving, continue working on it. So wrap up any items from step 2. Complete step 3, where we do this process of thinking about challenges and opportunities to your management objectives and evaluating feasibility. There's the homework screen at the end of step 3. And then, next time we meet for discussion, be ready to talk about those challenges and opportunities for the discussion in step 4. That's after our break. We do not have class next week. We did this, we gave you guys a winter break because we know that this is the point in the workbook where people are feeling a little overwhelmed with the workbook and the class and then your other work responsibilities and then sickness or storms, things happen and we get that. So we're going to take a break next week, allow everyone to catch up. And then we will end up meeting our next class. We'll skip February, the whole week next week. So we'll skip lecture on the 11th, the discussion sessions next week. Notice nothing. You'll use that for work time. And then our next class will resume on the February 18th. So 2 weeks from today. And we'll start talking about the adaptation actions, which is the part that everybody is really excited about. So I think that's it. Kaylee, anything to add?
Nope, I'm good. I'm going to Disney World next week, so I won't be here. Trying to get over the sickness before I go.
So, yeah, so everyone's going to catch up on their homework. Kaylee's going to have some relaxed time. A bunch of us are actually on the NIX team are going to be traveling, but we will be able to answer your questions. So that is it for today's lecture. I'm going to hit stop recording. We have a bunch of people on our team. If you have any questions, this is a good time because we can address them. And then I will, we'll have the same room at, on the hour for Kristen and Patricia to lead the discussion. So you can log out and log in or whatever, stay on the line if you're in for the Tuesday lecture. Thanks everyone, have a good week. Have a good week next week. Or I guess we'll see you tomorrow for the Wednesday people. So, all right.